All right, guys, thanks for understanding here. A little technical issues on the live stream, and we seem to have it all fixed. We got new links out for YouTube, Facebook, and as well as the Periscope, Twitter page, whatever it is. If you missed that first little rant about weekly leagues, well, you know what? I mean, I guess you could pretty much tune into any fantasy alarm show Monday through Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern because Jim will undoubtedly bring it up. I will continue the rant, and he and I are going to beat this horse dead until it get carted off to the glue factory. All right. So in the meantime, what we're talking about today here, we're talking about some selling high points. We're also going to talk about the futures game. It's the All-Star team. Has just been announced actually, and Craig, you said that there were some nice names there that you're kind of intrigued by.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these are all players that, remember, a lot. Some of them aren't household names, but really, Howard, the percentages are almost at 90% of these guys getting to the big leagues and getting there very quickly. So, Hunter Green is one of the most popular names in reality, probably in a keeper in fantasy. He will pitch on the USA team. He is the youngest player in this game. He's 19 years old, so interesting there. Forrest Whitley from the Astros also named, who a lot of people feel is the number one pitching prospect in all of baseball, but he got hurt last night, so I don't know if he's going to be able to play in this game.
Let me ask you here before you move on to Joe Adell, who Jim's been beating his chest about
He's right.
for a while. Talk to me about Forrest Whitley, though, because, listen, you take a 50-game suspension for PEDS, and what, we expect you to still be able to pitch like you're an ace? We don't know how long he was on it. We don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
really.
I think it was like an Adderall situation with him. I don't think it was.
Okay, listen, I've popped the Adderall also to make sure I'm much more focused in there. If you're doing it on a regular basis, or even if you're doing it every 5 days, when you stop it, not only does your body go through withdrawals, but you also kind of don't really recover the entire way. Because you're thinking in the back of your mind that you need that to maintain your focus. That kind of concerns me even more now.
Yeah, I'm not really concerned with him. If it was, there have been other players in the minors who have been caught for different kinds of PEDs, and from what I know, I'm just not putting it in the same category. It's just my opinion. But we'll see. He got hurt last night. It may be an oblique injury, and that could be sideline him for the rest of the year. Yeah. So, we'll have to keep an eye on that. Also on the USA team, the Mets, Peter Alonso was named there. He's going to be their starting first baseman in 2019, without a doubt, whether it is in April, May, or June. Carter Kieboom, infielder for the Washington Nationals, who's going to play probably either maybe second base for them, maybe eventually third base for them. But Howard, the other thing that he may do is he may be traded to another team where they can get somebody back in return for him. But he is arguably the Nationals' number 2 prospect now, behind Victor Robles, and he can hit 20 home runs, drive in 80 runs in the big leagues, but there's no spot for him. So, yeah, I'm not really sure. Brendan Rodgers is back again.
Wait, is that all right? First of all, is that Spencer Kieboom's brother? Are they brothers in the same organization? So Spencer's been working at as the backup to Pedro Severino,
Exactly.
which is interesting here. Why? I mean, if he's that good, if he shows that he's ready, and you're competing for a title, why wouldn't you want to get Daniel Murphy the heck out of there?
It's possible. It's possible later this year. I would. The thing is that if we're having this conversation 2 weeks ago, it's not even in the conversation because Murphy had just come back. But you're right. At this point, there's no doubt that he'll be in that conversation. The catchers I'm not familiar with, so we can move on from there. And the one name on here that I do want to mention, because this will be the first time that we're talking about him anywhere, there was a scout who told me during the season that the number 1 hitting prospect on the Pirates, his name is Ke'Bryan Hayes. And if Hayes sounds familiar, and you're thinking of the Pirates in terms of Hayes, and you're thinking of the Yankees in terms of Hayes, and not my
Charlie.
son. It's
Charlie's
his son.
kid? Nice.
Yes, his son. And he has some real potential in 2019, Howard, in fantasy. This is a name that we're going to be hearing a lot about. The scout that had been following the Pirates all April, May, June, and to this point told me he was the best player that he saw. So I'm happy to see him in the futures game, and that's a name to keep an eye on. Brendan Rodgers, is there a better hitting prospect in the minors than Rodgers? Probably not. Like he's going to be at Coors Field next year playing
Right.
second base every single day. I mean, just think of Trevor Story at second. I mean, and he'll probably be better than Trevor Story. LeMahieu will be gone. So next Sunday, Rogers gets a second opportunity to be in that. Joe Adell, who, as you mentioned, Jim Bowden's been talking about quite a bit. He's one of the top prospects in baseball, also athletic kid. Kyle Lewis, who was the first-round pick of Seattle's. I think he's probably a year or two away, and that kind of covers the hitters. And Dakota Hudson and some of the pitchers for the USA team. And your thoughts on that, and then I'll tell you more about the world team from what I see here.
I actually don't really have very many thoughts on that. What I'm looking for when I'm watching the futures game right now is because, listen, all of these names that we're rattling off, they're owned in competitive dynasty leagues. They're they're on somebody's roster.
I would say Ke'Bryan Hayes is not. I would say Ke'Bryan Hayes is not, and that would be somebody that after this weekend you'll need to jump on. And I understand that when we're doing this live stream right now, what we're doing in the first 10 minutes is talking to the small portion of the people who are interested, and the larger portion are not because they're still playing in their season-long leagues. But I do think it is important because of all the time that I spend in spring training and seeing these players and the identification of these players. When you hear a name for the first time, you never forget it. You always remember where you heard that name. And if you have the awareness of that, even if, let's use Hayes as an example. Let's say he doesn't do anything in the futures game this weekend, you completely forget about him. But then you're going into 2019, nobody's really talking about him. You're playing in an NL-only league or you're playing in a 15-team league, and then you may see him on a list somewhere and say, hey, I remember hearing that guy's name. Maybe I'll take him in the last round or second to last round. So for me, that's really all this is about at this point. I went to the futures game last year. I was there. I've been to 4 of them now. And they all they do is it's like a spring training. It gives you the recognition of who these guys are, what teams they're on. If they're traded at the deadline, you'll remember the name, you'll remember what they did, but you're not going to get a full gauge from seeing players in this game and understanding what they could do. It's just kind of getting to know them a little bit.
No, what I'm looking at actually for ththese guys when it comes to all my redraft leagues is I'm looking to see what their path is to a major league starting job.
Fancy, yes.
You know, if we're going to talk about Kai Boom, is it Kai Boom? Key Boom?
Yes. Yeah, Kai Boom. Mm-hmm.
Shaboom?
He's going to come on the morning show next week too.
Okay, so if you're talking about Kai Boom here, and you're looking at what his potential path could be, the Nationals are a competitive team right now. The Nationals know that they need to fight with the Braves and the Phillies if they want to come out ahead in this division, or at least with a wild card spot. So when you're sitting there, you do have a dead spot in your lineup with a guy like Daniel Murphy. And you've got a hot young up-and-comer who, you know what? Why wouldn't you give him an opportunity? Why wouldn't you try him out? Bring him in at the tail end of August. Let him get his feet wet so that way all of a sudden you see how he handles the big league pitching. He'll get his service time in during the month of September, and then he's eligible for the postseason roster. So when I look at a guy like that, I say, okay, here's the path. Here's what's happening. Is Joe Adell going to be as good as advertised? Because let's face it, Cole Calhoun, the dude's atrocious.
Yeah, it's not for this year for Adell, though. It'll be for next year. He won't get called up.
But see, that's what I want to look at and see. If DJ LeMahieu gets hurt, will Brendan Rodgers fill in? Is there a chance that Vlad Jr. or Bo Bichette gets that call right before September just to see what they're all about? I think that's really where I'm looking at for the futures game. So I've got all these things on my radar.
You tipped me off here a little bit to an idea that I want to expand on here for a minute. Now, I don't know this for sure, but here's how the futures game process works because I'm very familiar with it. This is not the futures game calling the players and telling them you're in the game. They call the organizations and they give them a list of a few players that they're considering inviting. And the team at that point can eliminate players from those lists for a number of different reasons. And this is where this gets interesting, Howard, because 1 is injury. That's obvious. 2 is an imminent call-up. And 3 is, potentially not just an imminent call-up, but maybe a call-up in a couple of weeks. You mentioned Vladimir Guerrero Jr. before we came on the air. I know he's been hurt. But Howard, here's the interesting part. Maybe the reason why he's not in this game is because he's getting called up. It's very possible. And the reason why I say that is, guess who else is not in this game? Who deserves to be and should be and is not? And there's no reason.
Do tell. Who?
Kyle Tucker is not in this game.
Oh, who's Kyle Tucker?
So maybe the Astros have told these guys, hey, no futures game for my guy because we want him to take the break, for the minor league all-star break to get called up. And I'm going to guess that that's the reason, and for sure, why Kyle Tucker's not in this game. And maybe even for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Jim and I were talking this morning about repeat performers in the game, and he was certain that he was going to be in this game. I had no indication one way or the other, but this to me is obvious. The reason Howard, if Bo Bichette is in this game for the second straight year and Brendan Rodgers is in this game for the second straight year, if you don't pick up Kyle Tucker in fantasy right now, you're making a big mistake because there's no excuse. He had a home run last night. There's no excuse for him not being in this thing other than the fact he's getting called up soon. It has to be.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. I'm definitely all in on that one. I've grabbed Kyle Tucker in a couple of redraft leagues where I do have that bench space available to be able to use him. So I dig it, man. I dig it, very much so. So that's the U.S. team right now. Any other before we move on to the world team? Any other U.S. players who you think? And let's look at it also from the pitching standpoint. Can somebody come in mid to late August, pitch through September? Because listen, there's nothing better than getting a pitcher who's like super hot, pitching in September when all the bottom feeders are bringing up all their AAA talent. So that can definitely help. And don't say Pablo Lopez.
Yeah, Mitch Keller is the only. Well, Lopez would have been in this game, Howard, but he got called up. The Marlins told him no. Mitch Keller is the only name on here that I could see. Maybe Dakota Hudson. Justice Sheffield is on this list. I don't think he'll get called up. I think that he'll be traded probably. If the Yankees are going to need to make a move, then that would be it. And truth be told, the other names, even though I'm familiar with them, I wouldn't say so. The unfortunate thing for me is with the world team, Howard, I don't know a lot of these guys. Okay, so this is, maybe for some fantasy analysts, they'll Google right now and tell you everything about them and pretend like they know. I got to be honest, about half the guys I know here, so I'll tell you who's on the world team. A catcher, Francisco Mejia. He was in the game last year. He's back in the game this year. He's already been called up, and I don't know that, Howard, there's another player that's in this game that has Major League service time except for him. I think he's the only one. Yeah. So he's in this game. He's a very good keeper catcher in fantasy. In terms of the infielders, Luis Garcia on Washington, like Kai Boom, is a very big trade target for a lot of teams. They're going to have to move him if they want to get something back in return. I think we all know who Fernando Tatis is. We could see him in September. Urias we could see in September. And I know who Yordan Alvarez, he plays first base, but he's got no path right now for Houston. In the outfield, Helio Ramos is the second youngest player in the futures game. He's San Francisco's top prospect. People see him as a 20 home run, 20 steal guy. The Cardinals named Randy Arozarena to this game. I saw him in spring training, but I don't know that he's a star of any kind. And out of the pitchers, I got to be honest, there's only two names I even recognize here. Jorge Guzman of the Marlins, because I know who he is. They got him for Stanton. And Jesus Luzardo on Oakland, who could be an interesting name to keep an eye on, because if the A's stay in this thing, they're not going to make a big trade, but they are, I think, 9 games over 500, so maybe he's the kind of player that they would call up. But this isn't anything new. The world team are international players. Mm-hmm. They have a harder time dipping to the minor leagues to find international players as opposed to U.S. Because remember, when the international players sign, Howard, they're 16 years old. So they take so long to develop to get to the big leagues, which is why the recognition for me isn't there on these guys like it is for the USA team. But definitely some interesting names. And I've had a great time covering this game and watching this game in person. I don't know that you can get a ton out of it, but at least now you remember the names. And when they're traded or next year when we're doing the draft, we'll keep an eye on them.
Definitely makes sense. Listen, I think that you need to watch it. I think it's if you're a hardcore fantasy player, you play every single year, whether it's redraft leagues or dynasty keeper leagues. You should always take a look at this. It's just, not only it's just a fun ball game to watch, but you're obviously doing some work. Like Craig said, it just puts the names fresh in your mind. Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely.
And I think that you hit on the biggest thing before we started, which is why is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. not in this game? If there are other players in this game, and either he's hurt or he's getting called up. And I think for sure in a season-long league, your biggest take from this is Kyle Tucker's coming up. It's got to be. I mean, there's no other reason for it.
Now we've got a question here on the on Facebook from our friend Stephen Feely, and this is where I think we get into trouble here with the scouting. Okay, because the question is do I drop Nomar Mazara or David Peralta for Kyle Tucker? And
no. And no.
Yeah, exactly. No. I mean, they're both. I mean, Nomar Mazara has 30 home run potential, 3,100 potential. Yes, does Texas have their issues? Yes, but the power potential that you're going to get from Nomar Mazara in the second half of the season is going to be fantastic. David Peralta has been incredibly productive for the team. Now, yes, Kyle Tucker is a guy who I'd say yes you want, but you cannot, and I can't stress this enough, you cannot drop productive, proven talent in order to take a flyer to stash a guy and hope that he gets called up soon. I don't care if it's a points league, head-to-head, roto, AL only, NL only. You cannot sit here and drop good, solid, productive talent in order to stash a guy like that. If you want to stash Kyle Tucker, sure, go ahead. Drop a lame duck pitcher that you're not using. If you have 7 closers on your roster, which a lot of you do, drop one of them. I mean, to me, you have to have the bench space in order to stash a guy like Tucker and be willing to continue in the future shorthanded. Okay, if you're not ready to play shorthanded for what could be a month, well, then you shouldn't be making that roster move.
And maybe so. I totally agree with what you're saying. But also, let's use this as a learning experience. We also don't know the answer to it. But I'll go back to when Howie Kendrick got hurt, and I sent the tweet out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. Hey, Howie Kendrick is hurt. They have no one else. Maybe Juan Soto gets called up. I don't know, but you definitely should be aware of what's happening. And by some miracle, he got called up, and everybody who ran to the waiver wire grabbed him. Howard, this is the same situation for me with this. This is a tip-off that there is a chance to me that he's coming up soon. Now, the names that you gave are very good examples of what not to do. And some people may get too excited and do exactly what this person is asking. But the reality is no, you're not going to cut those 2 players for him. The only thing that you want to do at this point is you got to look at your roster and you have to say, okay, if Craig is right, if Howard's right, if this is a tip-off, if Jeff Luhnow in an hour doesn't come out and say he's hurt or something that we don't know about, this is a very big indication that an impact bat is potentially coming to fantasy. And you said it right. It may not be in a week. It could be a month. But there's a reason why he's not in this game. And I don't know what it is. And that's the only thing that I can think of right now, at least for me for the time being. Now, Guerrero Jr., on the other hand, I don't know because, again, he was hurt. And that this may just be the Blue Jays protecting him and saying, look, you were in the game last year. We don't want you risking injury. By the way, this could be the Astros saying we don't want you in the game risking injury too. I mean, who knows? It's their choice. It's their choice. It's not the player. And they could be saying to Kyle, hey, you played in this game last year. There's nothing left for you to prove. We don't want to risk it in an exhibition game. It very well could. But then we're going down another road, which has nothing to do with fantasy, which is, okay, now all of a sudden, are the best players in minor league baseball not going to be playing in the futures game because of risking injury? That would stink too. That would take away from what they've tried to build with this game. It's gotten to the point where we've spent 30 minutes talking about it. So,
we've gotten to that point with the All-Star game too. Is that you're gonna tell a player that he needs to hold back and not play in the All-Star game if he's running a risk for a major injury. Like, let's say Giancarlo Stanton tweaks his hamstring 2 weeks before the All-Star game. Sorry, we pay your contract, we pay your salary.
That's right.
Well, we're telling you that you can't go. If that means that you've got a $25,000 bonus clause in your contract to make the All-Star team, we can make it up to you, but it's more important that you don't show up for this game and that you don't run the risk of being out for an extended period of time. I think the team should have carte blanche with things like that. They're the ones who are paying the contract. It's the same thing with the WBC. I think if a team doesn't want a player to play in the World Baseball Classic, they should have that right. The World Baseball Classic isn't paying the contract for a lot of these guys. And how many times have we seen a guy go to the WBC, either blow his load and just suck for the month of April, or worse, gets hurt in the WBC and can't start the season on time for the team that's actually paying his salary. So yeah. I think team control of that is of the utmost importance, actually.
Right, and the thing is too with this, as I'm thinking as we're going with this situation in particular with both players, and I think that you and I would both agree that if I said to you, give me one rookie in fantasy that you would want on your team, you can have him right now for the rest of the season, you would say Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And then if I said, okay, Howard, you can't have him, pick another one, you'd say Kyle Tucker. So I don't think it's a coincidence that both these two guys who are 1 and 2 are the best, and the answer also is they both played in the game last year, right? So maybe if it was a first-time player, it'd be a little bit different. They'd want him to play in the game. But also, this also tells me that Bo Bichette, who's in the game, may not be close to being called up again because they've given him permission to play in this thing. So we'll have to read between the lines a little bit. But the good news is in the next 48 hours and then next week going into Sunday, we'll start knowing more about these players and who they are and what they do. It's always an exciting time because the game has changed so much and fantasy has changed so much. You look at players that are coming up out of nowhere, and we'll get to a couple of those guys, maybe sell high guys like Muncy. Ozzy Albies was the my darling at the beginning of the season. Where was Ozzy Albies a year ago? Howard, I was at the Futures game a year ago. You know who Ronald Acuna was at the Futures game? Like the 8th best guy. No one was interested in him. All of a sudden, Acuna is the number 1 fantasy prospect in baseball. Victor Robles was way ahead of where Ronald Acuna was at this time last year, and he got hurt. So these things definitely change, but what's changed the most about fantasy to me is that while you still cannot cut proven commodities for prospects, you have to be well more aware of these kids now because of the internet age, because of how into prospects people are. To think that in 12-team mixed leagues you could just grab somebody on the waiver wire anymore, it's not the case, especially in the draft season at the beginning of the year. Now when people drop off a little bit, it's a little bit easier.
I agree. All right. Looks like we're frozen here on the screen, which is a huge bummer because obviously, you look just beautifully normal, Craig. Me, on the other hand, I look like I'm about to, go like bobbing for apples that are hanging like up here. So that's a little disappointing there. So we're going to hopefully get that fixed. In the meantime, let me ask a couple of questions that we're getting here. 5x5 head-to-head. Drop Marcus Semien for Jonathan Scope. Is Scope back? Dude hits 2 home runs yesterday. It was like his first 2 home runs in I don't know how long. Is this an overreaction to one game, or are you willing to make that swap, Craig?
Yeah, I guess you could buy a little bit low on Scope. Maybe he hits more home runs the rest of the season. The situation for Baltimore is as dire as it could possibly be. I'm probably going to say you can do it. I don't know that the difference is that much. And Simeon's playing on a very competitive team right now where more runs are going to be scored. So if I have to predict, batting average would go to Semien, steals would go to Semien, runs would go to Semien, but there is a chance that home runs and RBIs could go to Scope. So you got to base it on what you need.
All right. I can agree with that. I could definitely agree with that. How about, let's see. Lewis Thorpe, Australia, 19 Ks in last 2 outings at Chattanooga. I guess, is Thorpe a guy who we're looking at here? Is he on the world team? Lewis Thorpe. Jeffrey Groton on Facebook is chiming in about Lewis Thorpe.
Lewis Thorpe on the Twins. I don't know who he is. 6'1", 160 pounds. He is from Australia.
Yes,
like
and he's
here.
got 19 strikeouts in his last 2 outings for Chattanooga.
You know what? I don't know who he is, Howard. Got to be honest. I mean,
right.
I could do the fake Google and say, "Oh my gosh, Lewis Thorpe. He wears number 36. You know him. You know him.
You know him. He's 6'2", 231 pounds. He's got great downward play."
First time seeing his name on a list anywhere.
Right on. Well, big thanks, Jeff, for pointing us in his direction.
And now when he's a star next year, we'll mention Jeff on the Fantasy Alarm live stream as the guy who mentioned it first.
I'll give him a free month of the playbook if Lewis Thorpe.
If Lewis Thorpe wins the game in 2019.
No, not if he wins a game. He's got to make. I'll tell you what. If he makes 5 appearances in 2019, 5. As a starter,
as a
bullpen, not a bullpen guy.
Yeah, but don't you have to put some qualifiers on this a little, Howard? Too. I don't want to not give things away here. I'm all about that. But if Lewis Thorpe comes up and is 0-5 with an 8 ERA, should we be giving anything away for that?
Okay, so he can't suck. There you go. He can be average.
He can't be Lucas Giolito.
Oh man, I mean that's just downright mean. Like that's downright mean.
But eventually, but he's struggled a lot. If his numbers look like Giolito's coming up next year, then he gets nothing. But if he's okay, then he gets something.
Yeah,
okay?
I tell you what, Jeff. If he's got to keep an ERA of under 6. I'll give you 6. That's not bad, right? I'll give him 6. 5 starts with an ERA of under 6.
It's gonna be a battle, man.
Free month of the playbook. Write it down, baby. Send me an email, howard@fantasyalarm.com, to remind me. Look how he's just chimed in. He said, I'm remembering this. Write it down. Take a picture. Make sure you screenshot it, baby. I'm all in for it here. Lewis Thorpe, Australia, currently pitching at Chattanooga.
Never heard of this guy.
Our yummy, delicious friend in Staten Island, Adam Lorber, wants to know if you should drop Zach Godley for Justice Sheffield or Hill or Trevino.
No.
Yeah, drop him for Lee Trevino. You guys, only if it's Lee Trevino.
Have you seen Trevino's numbers by chance this year?
They're fantastic. He looks great coming out of the bullpen there.
You know how many wins he has?
No.
7.
7.
How did he get 7 wins?
Well, when you're on a team that plays like the A's do half the time, and they get their starting pitchers in there who are.
Yeah, they got a lot of.
Then you need one of those vultures there.
I don't think Justice Sheffield is good. Do you think Justice Sheffield's coming up?
I don't.
I think Justice Sheffield's going to be on like Toronto. I think they're going to have to trade him. I don't see any other way that they're going to get something elite at the deadline. Maybe they'll choose not to. And you know what? I think. I know it's being said it's going to be a wild trade deadline, and to me, I love the trade deadline. I love the winter meetings. As you know, I mean, I'm breaking every story. I don't see a lot of movement at the deadline, man. I just don't. Like, every team is already in position to get to the postseason. And, I mean, especially in the American League, there's just something about this year that tells me we're going to have it similar to what we had in the offseason, where teams are going to be hesitant to make big moves. Machado's going to get traded, yes.
Yep.
But beyond that, I just don't see it being wild. I think maybe August 31st, when guys go through waivers and teams at that point are so close to the postseason that they know what to do, I think at that point, like when Houston got Verlander, they got him on August 31st, not on July 31st. Mm-hmm. I think that is going to become more of a more interesting trade deadline than the July one.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with big contract players that some teams just simply can't pull up. But I think when you're talking about the competition for, let's just say, starting pitching here, Cubs losing Darvish, that's a big deal. The Angels definitely need starting pitching. The Yankees absolutely the Yankees absolutely need a number 2 starter behind Severino. They need that. They're not going to win without it.
They won't.
Even the Braves look like a team. Now, the Braves could get by on a Jay Happ or a Cole Hamels here, but the Yankees aren't doing that. And I think if the Cubs really want to make that push, like, Jay Happ and Cole Hamels, talk to Milwaukee, talk to, I don't even know. Like,
Seattle?
Like that. Those are the guys who are going to go to those teams. But when you're talking about the Yankees, you're talking about the Cubs. I mean, these are premier teams who need to spend the prospects in order to do it. Yankees have the farm system to do it. Cubs are going to be willing to wheel and deal as well. They've got decent depth that they can actually kind of pass around as well. So I'm looking at the situation for a number of these teams. Yeah, they might. It's not a question of can they make it to the playoffs. It's can you get out of the first round of the playoffs? Can you win that wild card game? Because I'll tell you what, if the Yankees are in a 3-game series, there's no way their pitching holds up. There's no way it holds up. Not based on the way Tanaka's looked this year. Not CC Sabathia. Certainly isn't going to be Loizaga.
Right, but in all of these trade questions, what you have to ask yourself is, are the players they're getting in return major upgrades from the ones that they have now? I mean,
Jacob deGrom is, yes, 100%.
No doubt, but there was a report today or yesterday saying they're not trading either of those guys. I mean, which could change. But again, that is a huge upgrade. Is Happ a huge upgrade? Is Hamels a huge upgrade? Is Tyson Ross a huge upgrade? I don't know, and I don't know what kind of deals are going to get done because of that slow offseason that we had. I don't really see it. I see lower level type prospects being traded for just dumping of salaries like Lance Lynn. That's the kind of trades that I see being made. But look, stranger things have happened. We'll see. Nobody saw Verlander again going to Houston. Nobody saw Yu Darvish going to L.A. From Texas. No one saw that. So, maybe some things will happen at the deadline. For me, I just don't see it being crazy because all the teams are already in position. And I think that when they get to August 31st, they can look at their team past that July trade deadline and go, okay, now what do we really need? We got a month to go. We're 4 games out. We like where we're at, or we don't like where we're at. And I think especially like the Cubs, what are they chasing? I mean, they're going to make it. Will they win the division? Will they be the wild card? I don't know.
Okay. All right. Listen, to me, it's perfectly fine. If it's not a busy July 31st trade deadline, I'm good with that. From fantasy perspective, especially in AL and NL only leagues, I'm where I'm sitting there near the top. I'm perfectly fine with it being a very quiet trade deadline and not give teams an extra month of looking at a new player who may or may not be able to make the difference there. So I can definitely get down with that. Now let's talk about the fantasy baseball trade deadline, Craig. A lot of teams, a lot of leagues end up going with like the mid to late August trade deadline in their leagues. It gives you time to when the dust settles on the regular trade, on the waiver trade deadline, but the non-waiver trade deadline, But for the waiver trade deadline, sometimes it comes a little bit before, which could kind of throw a monkey wrench into some people's plans. Let's talk about some sell-high candidates here. I've got 2 in particular. I wrote my article for tomorrow's edition of the New York Post. You guys can check that out, nypost.com. Just go to the sports section. You'll be able to – that'll be up later tonight. 2 guys, Craig, who I'm telling you, man, I am selling 100% in every league that I own them both in, and that's Nick Markakis and Max Muncy. I know everybody's like, Max Muncy, you can't trade Max Muncy. The guy's got 20 home runs and was just named the starting second baseman. Go back and look at Max Muncy's numbers for his career. Look at the fact of when he started in the minor leagues back in 2012. Yes, 2013, the dude hit 25 home runs between high A and double A, but he hasn't hit more than 12 home runs in a given season at any other level other than that year. Okay, the A's got rid of him. He couldn't crack the lineup over there. Now he's with the Dodgers. I'm sorry. But yes, you know what? If you're playing a little bit over your head because you're 27 years old, you're in your physical prime, and it's just kind of starting to click for you, yeah, is that going to give you a leg up on Logan Forsythe or an injured Justin Turner? Yeah, 100%. Can you beat out Chase Utley for that job? Yes, you can. But to sit here and tell me that Max Muncy profiles as a guy who is what? What do you think? He's going to hit another 20 home runs in the second half? You think he's going to hit another 15 home runs in the second half? I can't get behind it here, Craig. And to me, his value, now named the starting second baseman, has never been higher. So if you deal this guy off, you can hopefully get somebody. Maybe they trade you an outfielder that you so desperately need. Maybe you get a starting pitcher in return, who can actually make up the difference there. I just don't see Muncy being that guy, Craig, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I really don't know. It's hard to buy into something that you've never seen, but at some point you have to wonder if what you're seeing is real. I think we're past the halfway point, but using the 45% of the season left mark to say that Muncy would hit another 20 seems unrealistic. But what you're doing is you're selling 80% on the dollar with this player because there's no track record. So someone would be having to buy very high on him, and I think it's harder to sell. So you kind of have to put player comparison, player versus player. Would you trade this player versus this player? If you could trade Max Muncy and get George Springer, of course that's a deal that you'd want to do.
Yeah,
if somebody and then you
give me a league where that happens, dude. And then you take it a notch down, and somebody says, "I'll give you Justin Upton for Max Muncy," and you say, "Yeah, I'll probably still rather have Upton," but you kind of go down that chart as to where the value lies with him. And for me, if I had to set a total home runs in terms of from a wagering perspective, I'd probably put it at 12.5 or 13 for the remainder of the season, because he did hit 20 in the first half. I think that 12.5, 13 is a reasonable number to expect. Look, I don't know what's going to happen. This reminds me a lot of when Puig came to the big leagues with the Dodgers, and he just caught fire in LA almost in the same way. And then Puig has been a good player since, but he's been nothing close to what he was that first year and the fever that they caught there. But that fever did last with Puig all the way until the end of the season. He really rode that thing until September, and then he was a different guy the next year. He was speeding, got arrested, and the whole thing. So it depends. 80 cents on the dollar, sure. 50 cents on the dollar, probably not. I'd probably still hang on to him. And the reason why isn't because it's Muncy. It's because he's Muncy with being able to play second and third and all these places in the infield. I can shift him around a little bit, and I like to have those kind of guys. Would I trade Ian Kinsler for Muncy? No, I'd rather have Muncy. Kipnis? No, I'd rather have Muncy. Scope? I'd rather have Muncy. So it's all a debate of what the trade would be, and it's very hard to consummate a trade for fantasy, being that we're doing it for fake. Where give me a pitcher you would trade for Muncy, because I don't know. If somebody offered me Miles Michaelis for Max Muncy and I needed pitching, I may shoot a little bit higher than Michaelis if that is the case. So it's case by case basis for me. Unfortunately, I didn't draft him anywhere. I don't own Max Muncy anywhere. If somebody offered me him in a trade, I'd have to weigh it versus the other guys that I have. All right. Well, Jeffrey Groten's telling me that home runs is not the only stat. Dodgers offense can put up double-digit runs. Muncy's got to score some of those runs. No, he doesn't. I mean, go back again. Look at his strikeout rate, and look at how that's fluctuated, and it's risen since he's as he comes up a level. Look at the fact that his on-base percentage has fluctuated over the years the way it has. I'm just saying that there's not a lot of consistency with this guy, and he doesn't have that proven track record. Can we can we catch lightning in a bottle? Could he be this year's late bloomer, the Whit Merrifield? Sure, of course he can. But I'll tell you this, if I'm sitting there with Jonathan Scope on my roster and Max Muncy's been starting for me, and I know that I can put Scope into my roster, I'm going to shop Muncy around for a better outfielder. I'm going to shop Muncy around because he's the guy who's going to draw me a much better return where I need it. I mean, I don't think that I'm going to get that much of a drop-off, if any at all, going from Muncy to Scope in the second half, but I do know that I can upgrade one of my outfield spots or a pitcher spot if I'm dealing Max Muncy, who, I'm sorry, I don't believe, I appreciate and love what he's doing right now. I don't believe that it will last in the second half. You look at a lot of his peripherals there, and those numbers are pretty unsustainable. So...
Yeah, well, Villanueva did it in April and May, and he stopped too, and he didn't have any track record also. I feel a little bit different about Muncy, but I think for me, I think there is a chance that he continues to do similar to what he's doing and ends up with 30-plus home runs. It would be next year that I would have a hard time really buying into, because I've seen that a lot. Logan Morrison, Justin Smoke, and Yonder Alonso all basically came out of nowhere last year with no track records in the major leagues. They all hit 30 home runs, and then they turned into pumpkins, some of them again this year. So I think next year he'll be overdrafted, and I'll probably stay away from him. But this year I'm content in riding that wave a little bit more than I would. Michael Brantley, if somebody said they'll give you Michael Brantley for Muncy, you would do that?
Yeah. Yes, I would.
Okay. Yeah, just throwing out a comparison type.
I mean, I also have to see, who's my worst outfielder on my roster. If I got Cole Calhoun sitting in my lineup and somebody offers me Brantley for Muncy and I've got Jonathan Scope sitting there.
Well, let's eliminate Scope from the conversation because not everybody's fortunate to have a backup in a 12-team league. You may have to have Jerks and Profar there. You don't know. But assuming you're downgrading from Muncy.
Well, the question is, yes, it depends on the level that you're downgrading from Muncy. If you're downgrading to a point where you're looking at a Kinsler or a Kipnis, guys who are just over the hill and done, then no, maybe it doesn't make sense to make that deal. Even if Muncy does pull back, he's still probably going to be better than some of the bottom feeders there. But I'm talking about some of the guys who are in more of like a mid-tier level at the middle infield right now. Even a guy like Ketel Marte, who's been playing real well. If I had him as a backup sitting there, then I would consider trading Muncy away, if making sure that Brantley trade piece is going to upgrade my last outfield spot. So, I mean, it's a lot of give and take, and it's a lot of, situational work that you're making these decisions on. I'm just telling you, I'm just saying right now that I just don't believe in Muncy lasting the second half.
And you'll probably have a better chance of being right than being wrong, but we have seen these waves happen before with players.
Sure.
And I, to say that he would, and again, I'm giving you a number, 12 and a half, 13 home runs is what I would set it. You would probably go under on that number. I don't know what I would do. I haven't really thought it through, but I feel like that's around the number that he'll hit. He's got 20 now. If you said to me, will he have 30 at the end of the season? I would bet over on 30. Would I bet 35? I don't know. I may go under that number.
Okay. Let's talk about another sell high candidate, a guy who I just mentioned earlier also, and that's Nick Markakis. Now, Nick Markakis is he's tearing it up right now. He's been tearing it up this entire season. Is Nick Markakis a guy who you believe in can carry this momentum into the second half and duplicate his numbers? Because, if you look at the last 5 years, okay, he's hit 277. He's hitting 319 right now. So it's not a massive, it's not like a 220 to 319 jump, but 277 over the last 5 years is pretty significant. It's a pretty good sample size to tell you as to where he is. And you're talking about a guy who's been playing full time basically over those 5 years. So he's batted 277. And you look at his isolated power mark. Isolated power, if you don't know what ISO is, it measures your raw power based on your extra base hits, your doubles, your triples, your home runs.
Right.
Okay. And you look at the 168 ISO for Nick Markakis right now, which isn't outlandish by any stretch of the imagination. Your big power hitters are up in the in the low 200s with some sort of consistency there. So 168, it's better than league average, which is usually somewhere in like the 150 neighborhood. But you're also talking about a guy who over that 5 year span has never had an isolated power mark of 100, of over 129. So these kind of jumps that you're seeing here from year to year, he's got the contract incentive. He's going to be a free agent. The Braves are probably going to want to hold on to him and not deal him and just assume that, and be willing to take the loss because they don't want to screw with team chemistry here. But
yeah.
Do I want Nick Markakis on my fantasy team now, or do I trade him in maybe a package deal where I'm dealing like Nick Markakis and like a depth pitcher to try and get a George Springer, who I do have confidence in for the second half?
Yeah, I think with him, you have to identify what that team needs before making a trade, whereas opposed to Muncy, who what he does, he hits home runs. Markakis is a skill set at this point because he doesn't steal any bases at all. The odds of him hitting another 10 home runs in the second half would seem to be slim, and the odds of him driving in 58 runs seem to be slim. But at the same time, if I am looking at somebody else's team that needs runs and needs batting average, remember the league average is 240. If Markakis hits 280 the rest of the year, that's 40 points above what the average is. That can help you. And Howard, I don't care what anybody says. This guy's going to score 1,000,000 runs again in the second half. He scored 52 runs already. He's going to have another 50. That team is fantastic. And all the guy has to do is get on base about the same clip, even maybe less. So you're attacking the skill set. If you want to trade him, you look at somebody else's team and says who's lacking in runs, who's lacking in average, and that's what you do. Problem is, again, you're not dealing with somebody who's just had some astronomical home run total in the first half of the season that can't keep it going. While the RBI total is astronomical, that's not something that you can really quantify. But I would count on Markakis' numbers to look very similar with batting average, very similar with runs, and probably a deep decline in the other two numbers, home runs and runs driven in. At the end of the year, if you told me he had 14 home runs, I'd probably say you're right. You know, I mean, this power we haven't seen from him in a long time.
All right. Well, there you go. Any other guys who you're thinking about right now, Craig? I've given you two of my biggest sell high guys. Anybody out there that
I got buy guys right now.
Give me some buy lows.
Yeah, I think we may have tried to talk about this on Tuesday. I don't know if we got to it or not. I can't even remember. But Peraza on Cincinnati looks like he is going to be running wild in the second half of the season. And also, who's really come alive offensively, and I think it's a big reason why. Look, the A's are going to hit home runs with Olsen and with Chris Davis, but a lot of their home runs are solo. All of a sudden, Steven Piscotty has woken up. I don't know where this has been, but Piscotty looks great. And you put him in the lineup with those two other guys batting in front of Olsen and Davis. Those guys are going to hit 15 home runs apiece in the second half of the season. Piscotty could be one of the highest scoring run producers in baseball the rest of the season. So those are two names that I'm looking at in some fantasy leagues to target. And then the other player who I think will have a nice second half because he'll still be on the team, and I think he's getting more acclimated to the big leagues. And I think next year is a major sleeper is Ronald Guzman of the Texas Rangers. He just came off the concussion list. He's having a slow year in terms of batting average. Probably at the end of the year, about 230. But his first big league season, he's already got 8 home runs. He's going to stay in Texas. He'll be a power hitter for them for a long time. And I think that he could be in for another 8 to 10 home run punch at that first base position the rest of the season. And again, we just talked about those underperformers: Morrison, Smoke, the Yonder Alonso to a degree. You can attack that first base position with getting somebody nobody's ever heard of. Those are a few names that I've been looking at.
I love it. Absolutely love it. All right, let's get one more question in here, Craig, before we got to zip on out of here.
All right.
Our good friend at Triple H 2413 is looking for a good stack tonight, leaning towards the entire Dodgers lineup. Pena is hot trash. Now,
that's a word by you. That sounds like a you.
That's my boy Jason Newman. We communicate on a regular basis, and hot trash is definitely our preferred hashtag here.
Texas Detroit has a total of 9.5. So but he's right. It looks like Dodgers Angels is a 9. The games of the Angels not always a great park, but yeah, I mean I could see that.
Well, let's put it in this perspective here, because what you also want to do, especially if you're playing in a GPP tournament, is you also want to get that low-owned stack. Like I was sitting there last night, and I was rocking it with the with that Padres stack, and Asuaje and Myers produced for me. The other two guys that I used didn't, but they were both under 7% owned. And that's always a nice team. Oh, please, Martin Prado was in my lineup, and that dude was like Prado. He was like 2.3% owned in that tournament.
I'm telling you, man, that ball was flying out of there. It was so hot. Every ball that came off the bat of somebody was flying. I think that could happen again tonight. But
Australian Geo.
I don't care. I think I would on the Washington side. I think I would focus more on, but. Texas Detroit, like Zimmerman and Cologne, I could see a lot of runs going down in that game. Maybe a little Castellanos, or on the other side for Texas, maybe potentially Mazzara, as I mentioned, Guzman, maybe Gallo. Gallo's gotten hot all of a sudden again. He started hitting home runs, so maybe that's a direction I would go.
How about a little Justin Smoke Kendrick go boom against Sonny Gray?
He has looked bad too. What'd they trade for him, the Yankees? to open?
It was a bucket of rubbing mud and a bag of baseballs.
Boy, oh boy. Great career Sonny Gray has had, but
very disappointing. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here on the Fantasy Alarm live stream. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Remember, Craig and I are here every Tuesday and Friday from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. And yeah, let's cruise through it, man. We got lots going on here, Craig. People are dropping like flies in fantasy baseball leagues. Everybody's getting their fantasy football itch. I think it's up to you and I to keep them locked into fantasy baseball right here.
No doubt. I know the biggest drop-off is right after the All-Star break. That's the biggest, we've lost probably in fantasy baseball right now in our season-long leagues, a very small amount, 5 or 10%. Probably just the last-place teams right now are not paying attention. But then that All-Star break hits, and it has nothing to do with football to me. It just has to do with fantasy baseball sickness and apathy. They get to that deadline, they forget, after 4 days, maybe I just won't check my team anymore. It happens all the time because once you stop, it's hard to pick it right back up. But nothing wrong with playing for pride, and we'll help you do that if you're at the bottom. And if you're at the top, we're going to ride this out all the way through the end.
Absolutely. Sounds great. All right. That's going to do it for us today. For Craig Mish, I'm Howard Bender. Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Alarm live stream. See ya. Bye-bye.